Palantir, also works extensively now in the private sector as well. They're a major AI engine for Wall Street banks, for example, and they have different programs that are sold to different entities, but ultimately they are a massive contractor to essentially every U.S. intelligence agency, and that includes DHS and ICE. It's meant to be an entire dragnet of basically pre-crime, and Palantir, in concordance with Poindexter's ambitions, has been a major piloter of pre-crime technology in the United States. I think they began doing that in New Orleans initially, but they call it predictive policing.
We're entering an era where the boundary between public safety and total surveillance is disappearing, and it's not happening by accident. The same technology once sold as a shield against terrorism has quietly become a tool for predicting, profiling, and preemptively targeting people long before they've done anything wrong. What began as a wartime experiment has evolved into a civilian dragnet, an invisible web of data systems that now decides who gets watched, who gets flagged, and who's deemed a potential threat. And at the center of it all sits Palantir, a company that's far more than a tech firm. It's the modern face of predictive policing, surveillance analytics, and pre-crime modeling. But as investigative journalist Whitney Webb points out, its roots trace back to figures who have spent decades building the infrastructure for a completely monitored society. Men like John Poindexter, known as the godfather of modern surveillance, and billionaire Peter Thiel, whose influence now stretches across finance, health, and national security. Whitney explains how these systems, originally marketed as counter-terrorism tools, have quietly merged with Wall Street, healthcare, and even local policing networks. What began as an effort to stop terrorists before they act is now being used to track everyday citizens, to predict behavior, monitor health, and determine risk in ways that sound less like freedom and more like social programming. It's a system that thrives on our data, our fear, and our compliance. And as Webb warns, its reach isn't limited to national security anymore. It's in our hospitals, our mortgages, and even our emergency response networks. What's being built today isn't just about keeping us safe. It's about keeping us under constant watch. In today's video, we'll unpack Whitney Webb's explosive revelations about Palantir, the people behind it, and how the architecture of surveillance has quietly fused with the machinery of everyday life. She connects the dots between intelligence agencies, private corporations, and health institutions in ways that will leave you questioning just how much privacy we really have left. Stick around until the end, because what she reveals later in this interview will change the way you think about technology forever. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Your engagement helps us keep bringing you these critical stories. Thanks, and enjoy the video.
So John Poindexter, as of course you know, was one of the national security advisors to Reagan and was the highest ranking member of his administration that was indicted as part of Iran-Contra. But he is also remembered as the quote-unquote godfather of modern surveillance. And this is in part because of his efforts in the immediate post-9/11 era, pioneering an office within DARPA that housed a program called Total Information Awareness. So right after the Reagan administration, Poindexter was sort of in various roles throughout these tech companies that were sort of a prototype to what Palantir and Total Information Awareness would later do, like Saffron Technology, Syntech Technologies that were defense contractors and trying to basically create predictive analytics to determine what terrorists would do next, all before 9/11 even happened. And of course, there was a renewed demand for that type of technology and these sort of innovative solutions in the immediate post 9/11 era. When this information, was reported on Total Information Awareness, there was a huge outcry throughout, U.S. mainstream media. A lot of organizations, including the ACLU and organizations like that, rightly noted that it would eliminate the constitutional right to privacy and create this very disturbing era of mass surveillance by, I think one of the mainstream media reports on it said that it would fight terrorism by terrifying U.S. citizens, basically, and making everyone a suspect under this type of this paradigm he was seeking to usher in. And so it was eventually, under pressure. It was, I think, first announced in February 2003. And by May, they attempted to change the name to Terrorism Information Awareness, trying to move away from the idea that it would be total, it would surveil absolutely everyone through a name change. But obviously, it didn't change how the program actually worked. It would still be focused on everyday Americans. A total dragnet, really. And in that same month where that name change happened, Peter Thiel incorporated Palantir. And as Palantir was developing as a company, Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, the Palantir co-founders, reached out to Poindexter directly through Richard Pearl, who's a well-known neoconservative figure and was also one of the architects of the Iraq War at the Bush-era Pentagon. And, basically they hatched this plan to privatize this program, rightly calculating that if they turned it into a entirely private sector enterprise, the outrage would, essentially dissipate, which it remarkably did because, originally it was a public-private partnership housed within DARPA. And then by making it this private sector enterprise, a lot of the concerns about it disappeared. And this is arguably because by moving into the private sector, they were able to accomplish a lot more than they could have by being affiliated directly with the public sector, even though they contract with the public sector. And so Palantir, funding-wise, was set up with money from Peter Thiel himself, and that the algorithm for it had originally been developed at PayPal, and the other funding source was the CIA's In-Q-Tel. And one of the figures that helped made that funding decision was the CIA's chief information officer at the time named Alan Wade. And Alan Wade had been one of the top allies of the total information awareness with Poindexter, in the immediate post 9/11 era. And so the CIA was Palantir's exclusive exclusive client for, I believe, the first 6 years of its existence as a company. And its engineers went to Langley, CIA headquarters in Virginia every 2 weeks for several years as well, where the CIA was developing their algorithm with them, in a very direct partnership. And Alex Karp has even said that the CIA was always the intended clients of Palantir. So I guess I'll pause there, and I'm happy to go in any other direction.
Explain what it does, what Poindexter's goal was, and what they were able to establish. I mean, the mechanics of it.
So Poindexter's goal was extremely broad. I mean, it really covered, it's absolutely staggering when you think about it. So the way it was initially sold to the public was this is a way to stop terrorism attacks before they happen by collating so much data from all different sources, and then using it in some sort of analytic or AI to determine, if certain data points are flagging that a terrorist attack will take place here or there. But there's various different aspects of this program that didn't really get enough coverage at the time. So one is that they attempted to use free market forces to determine if a terrorism attack would happen before it happened. They created basically what's referred to as a terrorism futures market. It was really like a forerunner to poly market and some of these predictive markets where people bet on things online. It was basically that, but about whether a terrorist attack will happen in the Middle East, or if there will be turmoil in the Middle East, if someone like Yasser Arafat would be overthrown. These were the kinds of things they were going to have these unnamed investors bet on. Another one was focused entirely on health under this program called biosurveillance, which actually a lot of it Palantir helped launch with HHS during the COVID era, things like analyzing American wastewater to determine if there is going to be an outbreak of a disease before it happens with again, with an algorithm, or basically, surveilling Americans' health data and to determine if there will be a pandemic before it happens, or if there will be a bioterror attack. Because remember, this was also in the aftermath of the anthrax attacks, and so a lot of that, particularly on the health front, has absolutely come under the portfolio of Palantir in the years since. They now control basically all of the health data at HHS, and also the CDC under the HHS, and also the NHS in Britain as well, and have continued to expand on that front.
What's most disturbing is how seamlessly this entire network has embedded itself into civilian life. According to Whitney Webb, programs that once operated in the shadows of DARPA and CIA labs are now running our local police databases, healthcare systems, and financial infrastructures. Algorithms initially designed to hunt terrorists are now predicting who might commit a crime, who might get sick, and even who might be risky to lend to. It's an entire ecosystem built on pre-crime logic, and what's worse, it's largely accepted under the guise of technological progress. Just think about it. Over the past few years, everything from pandemic management to online censorship has leaned on these predictive systems. Webb traces how this transition, from surveillance to safety, was engineered to normalize the idea that being monitored is simply part of modern life. And that's what makes her next revelation so unsettling, because it shows just how deep this rabbit hole goes.
Palantir, also works extensively now in the private sector as well. They're a major AI engine for Wall Street banks, for example, and they have different, programs that are sold to different entities, but ultimately they are a massive contractor to essentially every U.S. intelligence agency, and that includes DHS and ICE, which a lot of the critical reporting on Palantir focuses on their contracts with ICE specifically, but all of that is intended to also be used against people that are not illegal immigrants. It's meant to be an entire dragnet of basically pre-crime, and Palantir, in concordance with Poindexter's ambitions, has been a major piloter of pre-crime technology in the United States. I think they began doing that in New Orleans initially, but they call it predictive policing is the term that they use. But a lot of other companies have attempted to also get in on this. One of the most notorious being Predpol, that was a partnership, I believe, with UCLA and LAPD or something to that effect. And they're notoriously inaccurate, and they're almost always piloted in low-income minority neighborhoods, and basically are a way in essence, what happens, because the accuracy rate is so low, is that you're creating this pipeline of people basically being sent to prison, or being caught up in crimes that are very petty. But you're just sending police to all these areas in a relatively discriminatory way. But Predpol is really outrageous, because it's like accuracy was found to be like insanely low, and they didn't phase it out despite the extreme inaccuracy. It was worse than a coin toss, essentially, and departments around the country continued to use it. And then in some of these areas where Palantir ended up leaving, another Peter Thiel-backed entity called Carbine also has a predictive policing component, but has been sort of taking over 911 emergency call systems, throughout the United States, which is, generally at the county level. But this is a company that wasn't just funded by Peter Thiel. It was funded by Jeffrey Epstein, and was led for a significant amount of time by Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister. As well, and has sort of expanded outwards. So a lot of Poindexter's ambitions, unfortunately, have been becoming true at a really rapid pace, and part of this was done under the guise of combating the COVID-19 situation with data, that we needed data to solve those problems.
Are you in essence just creating profiles? These are just creating profiles for every American citizen?
Well, ultimately, I mean, that's been acknowledged now. I think there was a report on that a few months ago. The Trump administration was explicitly using Palantir to make databases on every American, but that has been done in a way that has been more covert through something called the main core database. That was, again, something that goes back to Iran-Contra. And persists into the present. But this is sort of a way to make it a more overt program that can be used openly by law enforcement, arguably. And I would say if you look back to how the Trump administration behaved around the end of 2019, there were a spate of mass shootings, and basically their response to those was to create the legal infrastructure for pre-crime. So after the El Paso Walmart shooting and some of these shootings that happened during that time, William Barr, then Attorney General, created this program at the DOJ called DEEP that was basically created the legal infrastructure for pre-crime. And you had Trump come out and say that the way to combat these shootings was to have social media develop algorithms that flag posts to predict shooters before they can act, target some of these anonymous online message boards, and he was also considering this program he was being pitched creating a DARPA for Health, HARPA, which was actually created under Biden under the name ARPA-H. They just moved the H to the back. And the pilot program for that was being pitched during the Trump era was called Safe Homes. It's an acronym. And basically that was about using AI to scan American social media posts en masse to determine what they called early warning signs of neuropsychiatric violence, and that people that were flagged by that algorithm could then be sent to, a court-ordered physician or put under house arrest, or all sorts of possibilities were fielded. And it ultimately wasn't adopted by Trump, but these are the types of things that they were considering. And so now, given the current climate, how extremely entangled Palantir has become with the current administration, expanding even into the IRS and Treasury and mortgages, in addition to just the national security components and health components, it is rather unsettling. But a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this profiling of Americans has been going on for a long time under the guise of, what were developed by the Iran-Contra crowd covertly, the continuity of government protocols in this effort by parts of the quote-unquote deep state or the national security state to basically profile people they deemed unfriendly for whatever reason, people that could be potentially incarcerated in a time of political upheaval, they said. But the Reagan administration's examples of political upheaval in these cases were, one example given was widespread mass protests that were nonviolent against U.S. military intervention in Latin America, like in Nicaragua, for example, was something that could have them use these profiles they had developed on Americans then back in the 1980s and incarcerate them at a time deemed convenient or necessary by the Reagan administration. And they claimed then at the 1980s to be able to locate these so-called dissidents almost immediately based on the data they had compiled on them at that point. So imagine what it's become, over the past 25 years when we've seen a lot of these extreme surveillance capabilities and also the development of the associated technology just take off in the aftermath of 9/11, 2001.
Whitney Webb's investigation doesn't just reveal a single company's overreach, it exposes a philosophy that has taken root across America's most powerful institutions. From intelligence to banking, from healthcare to policing, the same predictive data model is being replicated everywhere. It's no longer about gathering information, it's about controlling outcomes. And it's being done quietly, without debate, through private contracts and government partnerships that most citizens will never hear about. In this new paradigm, your data isn't just collected, it's weaponized. A single flagged data point, a predictive model, or an algorithmic assumption can determine how you're treated by law enforcement, how your bank views your creditworthiness, or even how healthcare systems interpret your medical risks. And as Webb explains, what started with DARPA's total information awareness has effectively gone private, beyond oversight, beyond accountability, and beyond public reach. It's no longer theoretical either. Palantir now runs critical data systems for the Department of Health and Human Services, the CDC, and even the NHS in Britain. The same company that once helped ICE target immigrants now manages the most intimate data of millions of patients. The same founders who built surveillance tools for the CIA are now providing AI engines for Wall Street's biggest banks. And yet, no one is asking what it means for a single private network to have access to every corner of our lives. Even industry leaders are starting to say the quiet part out loud. Just recently, Oracle founder Larry Ellison, one of the richest people on the planet, made a chilling remark. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that is going on. The quote went viral, but few seem to grasp what it truly meant. It's not a hypothetical future. It's a declaration of what's already being built, a future where obedience is incentivized and privacy is a relic of the past. The question now is simple but urgent. How much are we willing to trade for convenience? Because the infrastructure of control doesn't arrive with jackboots. It arrives through dashboards, APIs, and public-private innovation. And as Whitney Webb makes painfully clear, by the time we realize how much of our freedom has been digitized away, it might already be too late. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think this surveillance state can still be reversed, or have we already crossed the point of no return? If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.